Now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. Faced with a global pandemic, on and off again, antivirus restrictions, an unprecedented global supply chain crisis, and the Federal Reserve's decision to speed up tapering, South Korea's financial markets had a rather unremarkable 2021. As we head into next year, the exponential spread of the Omicron variant of COVID-19 is adding to this looming sense of unease and uncertainty. That said, there are some analysts out there who are reasonably confident that South Korea's financial markets will recover at a quicker pace in 2022, especially once these jitters over Omicron subside.
South Korea's chip, auto, and battery stocks were among the top performers in 2021, and brokerages expect more of the same next year, citing solid growth momentum in those sectors. For more, we connect to Stephen Borwick, a writer, journalist, and broadcaster based in Seoul. Good morning, Stephen.
Good morning.
Now, considering all the uncertainties swirling around, how are market watchers assessing the performance of South Korea's financial markets, the Kospi and Kosdaq, over the past 12 months?
It's been an interesting year. I mean, as we've laid out, the pandemic obviously introduced a lot of uncertainty, but another thing that it did was it brought a lot of liquidity to the market in that there was some pretty generous stimulus packages in Korea. There was government payouts that went to households. And there was a lot of investments by companies who were doing particularly well. Exports were very robust, so that led a lot of companies to invest in facilities and invest in their export capacity. And so it's been a mixed bag. There was also some pretty big IPOs, Kakao Bank in particular, and there was quite a turn by the Korean public, by a lot of retail investors looking to the stock market as a way of perhaps compensating for other lost income during the pandemic, or looking for some kind of productive use for the stimulus funds that they received. All in all, I think we can say that it's given the national and international context and all of the unprecedented things that were happening, and most recently with the rise of the Omicron variant, I think we could say that things went fairly well, and there's that uncertainty is definitely going to continue into the new year, but I think there's some cause for optimism as well. And I think we can conclude kind of tepidly that the fundamentals of the Korean market are strong, and it'll be interesting to see what happens going ahead.
Now, looking forward to next year, lots of unknowns at this point, but a lot of analysts expect firms in Korea's core industries really now of chip making, automobiles and batteries to continue doing well in 2022. Do you think most watchers share that view? And potentially, are there any dark horses outside of those sectors or even particular companies that investors perhaps might be keeping extra close tabs on next year?
Well, a lot of the optimism in the Korean market over the past year has come from the chip sector, and I just read an estimate that the semiconductor market grew at something like 30% over the past year. That's probably not sustainable. So I think from an investor perspective, some chip stocks may not have the same kind of performance over the next year that they've had over the past year, but chips do still occupy a really pivotal part of the economy, and I still think there's a lot of bright outlook there, a lot of reason for optimism. At the same time, one thing that I think is quite interesting is that a lot of Korean companies are in the batteries, as you mentioned, the battery sector, the biohealth sector, and a number of others are really undergoing right now some quite intensive investments in technology and investments in doing things in new and more eco-friendly and more efficient ways. So I think it's to some extent it's an exciting time in the Korean market in that you have a lot of the older and more established companies like Hyundai Motor, for example, who are really investing in looking ahead and looking to have some new products and some more technology intensive things. And so I think there's reason for excitement and optimism there, and particularly as the market has calmed over the past quarter or so in a lot of the key sectors, the one sector that has continued to show some upward momentum is biohealth. And given the pandemic and given the demand for for innovation in this sector, I think that's one area that investors will look to as a source of continued optimism.
Now, Stephen, let's turn to IPOs. There's little doubt 2021 was a remarkable year for IPOs here in South Korea. Well, the market for initial public offerings was on fire with about $10 billion raised in the third quarter alone, thanks largely to the success of KakaoBank's blockbuster debut. For our international viewers, can you explain why retail investors in South Korea have such an insatiable thirst for IPOs?
Well, I think part of it is tied to the government stimulus that we discussed earlier. A lot of people having some of these kind of lump sum payments of cash that were, not a part of a continuous income. There were these one-time payouts, and I think it was natural that people would try to look for ways to make that money and turn it into a source of income. Also, there's just, if you look at the Korean employment market, there's just there's a smallish number of companies that hire for big permanent jobs, and people are looking for other ways of making money. We've seen explosions in the real estate market, and I think the boom in real estate investors retail investors is part of that. It's people looking for ways to provide for themselves amid a rising cost of living. There were a lot of people who were of an kind of entrepreneurial mindset, who ran small businesses, who ran into a lot of problems with the social distancing measures implemented by the government throughout the pandemic. People were unable to do business and unable to operate as normal. So there's a real appetite for money-making opportunities that don't require traditional employment. So I think we can tie the boom in retail investment to that.
Yeah, it seems this year there was a little bit of a shift in so much that investors were a little bit more discerning about what IPOs they wanted to jump into. So it isn't just flooding into every single one that comes out. But finally, the Kospi has been ranging between around 2,900 to around 3,300 over the course of the year. So not really that interesting, relatively tight range. But some analysts forecast there'll be some slight upward momentum next year. Do you think that the Kospi could break out of this range in an upward direction, or do you think we're just going to see more of the same?
I'm not going to put a number on it because I'm not really in the prediction business so much, but I would just flag a few ongoing developments that I think are interesting. There's, the Korean government with an election coming up and with having allocated a lot of money to stimulus spending, that's going to tail off in the next several months. So I'm curious to see just to what extent the economy is able to remain above water without that kind of generous government support. There's some inflationary pressure, as we've talked about, and the memory chip and the equity market look like they're poised to undergo some downturns, perhaps not super drastic downturns, but they're unlikely to have the kind of performances they've had over the past 12 months. Again, one thing I think that we ought to look to is as companies invest in new products and invest in more technology intensive ways of doing things, I hope to see that there will be some of these more established companies having new products and new things that can boost investor optimism, while also creating things that can help us, maybe address these very serious challenges of the pandemic and climate change. So the biohealth sector is another one. I hope to see some new and exciting stuff that will boost the market and also create some useful products.
All right, Stephen, as always, thank you so much. It's always great to speak to you. Happy New Year, and we'll see you again in 2022.
Thanks a lot. Happy New Year.